The Tarot Major Arcana are not just cards. They're a map of the human journey itself. What if the Major Arcana were never meant to be understood as just card meanings? What if they were something much deeper than that? What if instead of being simply symbols used in a reading, they were actually a living map of the human evolutionary journey itself? Because that, in essence, is what I believe the Major Arcana really are. They're not just cards. They're archetypal patterns. They're recurring movements in every human experience. They're the stages, tensions, thresholds, crises, awakenings and completions that shape the deeper arc of our lives. And if you're willing to begin to understand them in that way, the meaning of the tarot changes completely. Welcome to the Tarot Major Arcana. On this channel, I want to explore with you the 22 Major Arcana, not as mystical, magical, fortune-telling symbols or fixed card meanings. I want to explore them as a profound map of human emotional, psychological, and spiritual transformation. And in this first video, I want to lay out that foundation. So please do like and subscribe if you're ready to go much, much deeper. So what are the Major Arcana really? And why do they matter so much when we want to understand the tarot in a deeper, more meaningful way? For many people, the first encounter with tarot are through keywords, high-level, symbolic statements. The Fool means new beginnings. The Magician means manifestation. The Lovers means relationship with self and others. Death means transformation. The Tower means upheaval, and so on. And while those kinds of meanings can be useful on one level, they can also be very limiting if that's where our understanding stops. Because the Major Arcana are not just a list of symbolic definitions. They're not simply 22 separate concepts, and they're certainly not just a deck of spiritual flashcards. They form a journey and a structure. They're a map of human experience and development. And the deeper you look, the more you see that each Major Arcana archetype represents a recurring energetic force that repeats in and throughout a whole human life. Not just in divination, not just in readings, but in relationships, in your identity, in crisis and in loss, in healthy growth as well as in shadow. It repeats in your healing, in your awakening, and in your evolutionary path through this physical experience. Sometimes strange, sometimes painful, sometimes beautiful. All part of the process of becoming more whole. So what do I mean when I say the Major Arcana are archetypal patterns? An archetype is a recurring structure of human meaning and experience. It's a pattern that appears across time, across people, across different life situations, even though the outward details may change. For example, the archetype of authority is something human beings encounter again and again. The archetype of a relationship is something we live through repeatedly. The archetype of surrender, the archetype of conflict, the archetype of rupture, the archetype of healing, the archetype of awakening. These are not random themes. They're all part of the deep patterning of human life. And what makes the Major Arcana so powerful is that they symbolize these recurring forces with extraordinary precision and depth. So instead of seeing the Emperor as simply a card that means authority, structure or control, we can begin to see it as a living archetypal pattern that shows up whenever questions of boundary, order, self-command, father patterning, or distorted authority are active. Instead of seeing the Lovers as merely romance or attraction, we can begin to see it as a deeper archetype of polarity, vulnerability, relational truth, and the challenge of conscious choice. Instead of seeing death as a dramatic card that means endings, we begin to understand it as a lawful archetype of release, transition, and the necessity of letting go when something has reached completion. This is a very different way of approaching tarot, and in my view, a far more meaningful one. Another reason the major arcana are so important is that they don't exist merely as separate archetypes. They also form a sequence, a development and transformational journey. And at the broadest level, the major arcana can be understood as mapping the deeper movements of human life through stages such as innocence, agency, relationship, discipline, conflict, surrender, rupture, healing, awakening, integration, and ultimately completion. In other words, they describe not only what we experience, but how we move, how we begin, how we form identity, how we encounter other people, how we become divided within ourselves, how life breaks what can no longer hold, and how healing slowly returns, and awakening calls us forward, and how completion, when it truly comes, is not just the end of something, but the integration of what has been learned through the whole journey. If this way of looking at tarot speaks to you, then please do subscribe to the Tarot Major Arcana channel. We'll be exploring the 22 Major Arcana as a path of archetypal awakening, inner transformation, and deeper self-understanding. This is why the Major Arcana matter so much, because they're not just merely descriptive. They're orientating. They help us understand where we are, what kind of pattern are we living inside, what kind of threshold are we facing, and sometimes what kind of transformation is being asked to happen. This becomes especially powerful when you start to see that many of the struggles people face are not random. They repeat. People repeat relationship patterns. They repeat authority conflicts. They repeat collapse before completion. They repeat shame cycles. They repeat self-sabotage. They repeat fear of endings. They repeat over-giving, over-controlling, over-adapting, over-performing, or disappearing into other people. And when those patterns repeat, it can be incredibly helpful to ask, what if this is not just a problem? What if this is an archetypal pattern? What if this is not merely bad luck, poor timing, or a personal defect? What if I'm living inside a recurring structure of human experience that the Major Arcana already describes? That question changes everything, because it moves us out of randomness and into pattern. And once we can see the pattern, we can begin to understand it more consciously. We can begin to ask better questions. We can begin to see what's blocked, what's distorted, what's overactive, what's underdeveloped. They don't just give meaning, they give orientation. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying tarot can't be used for readings. I'm not dismissing divination. But I do think that if we stop at prediction or surface meanings, we miss a vast amount of what the Major Arcana actually offer. Because the Major Arcana are not shallow, they're not trivial, they're certainly not just aesthetic spiritual symbols. They're among the most powerful symbolic representations of the human journey that we have. And when they're approached as such, tarot becomes something far more than a tool for asking what is going to happen next. It becomes a mirror of the psyche, a map of transformation, a language for recurring life patterns, and a guide to the deeper structures shaping our experience. It's this personal development and therapeutic coaching approach that I'll be taking in everything I share here on the Tarot Major Arcana channel. I'll be exploring questions like, what does each major arcanum really represent at a deeper level? How do these archetypes show up in real life? How do healthy, blocked, and shadow expressions of the cards differ? How do the major arcana connect to the tree of life? How can these archetypes help us understand recurring emotional patterns, shadow dynamics, personal transformation, and the deeper journey of becoming? And how can tarot be approached not just as divination, but as a profound system of self-understanding and inner development? That's at the real heart of this channel. So if you've ever felt that the Major Arcana carry more depth than most tarot discussions allow, if you've sensed that these cards are not just symbols to interpret, but patterns to live through, work with, and understand, then you're in the right place, because exactly that's what we're going to explore here. The Major Arcana are more than tarot card meanings. They're a living map of transformation and evolution, and this is just the beginning. If this resonates with you, subscribe to the channel, and in the next video we'll begin going deeper into the 22 Major Arcana as a complete journey of inner transformation. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.